Every dollar in your wallet is a lie. Not metaphorically, not philosophically. Literally, that piece of paper you work for, save, sacrifice for. It's not backed by gold. It's not guaranteed by anything real. It's a promise from an institution that isn't what you think it is. An institution that operates in shadows, that answers to no one, that has more power over your life than any elected official. And the most terrifying part, most Americans don't even know it exists. Or if they do, they think it's part of the government. It's not. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It has no reserves. And it's not working for you. This is the story they don't teach in schools. The conspiracy that's hiding in plain sight. The secret that explains why you can work harder every year and still fall further behind. Because in 1913, on a cold December night, when most of Congress had left for Christmas, a small group of men fundamentally changed the nature of American power. They privatized the money supply, they handed control of the nation's currency to private bankers, and they did it so quietly, so cleverly, that more than a century later, most people still believe the lie. The story begins with panic. 1907, October. The New York Stock Exchange was in free fall. Banks were collapsing. People were lining up to withdraw their savings. The entire American financial system was on the verge of total collapse. And there was no central bank to stop it. No lender of last resort. No safety net, just chaos. And into that chaos stepped one man, J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in America. Maybe the most powerful banker who ever lived. Morgan didn't just have money. He had influence. He had connections. He had the ability to move markets with a single decision. And in 1907, he did something extraordinary. He locked the most important bankers in New York inside his library. Literally locked the doors. And he told them they were unleaving until they agreed to pool their resources to stop the panic. It worked. Morgan saved the American economy through sheer force of will and private capital. But it revealed something terrifying. Something that kept powerful men awake at night. The American financial system depended entirely on the whims of private bankers. There was no institutional structure, no government control. Just Morgan's library and a handful of men deciding the fate of millions. And that's when they had an idea. What if they could create an institution that looked like government control but operated like a private bank? What if they could convince America it needed a central bank for stability, while ensuring that central bank remained in private hands? It would be the perfect deception, the ultimate power grab disguised as public service. And so in November of 1910, 6 men boarded a private train car in New Jersey. They traveled in secret to Jekyll Island, Georgia, a private club, a place where the wealthiest men in America went to escape scrutiny. And for 9 days, these 6 men designed the future of American finance. Senator Nelson Alden, Frank Vanderlip of National City Bank, Henry Davison of J.P. Morgan, Charles Norton of First National Bank, Benjamin Strong of Bankers Trust, and Paul Warburg of Kuhn Loeb and Company. Together, they represented approximately 1/4 of the world's wealth, and they were there to write the blueprint for the Federal Reserve. But here's what's crucial. Here's what changes everything. They knew they couldn't call it a central bank. Americans hated the idea of centralized banking power. The country had killed 2 previous attempts at central banks. So they had to be clever. They had to make it look decentralized. They created a system of 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. Made it seem like power was distributed. But they built in a crucial detail. The Board of Governors, 7 people in Washington who would control monetary policy for the entire nation. And those 7 people, they would be appointed by the president and confirmed by Congress. It looked like government control. It looked like democratic oversight. But it was theater, because the 12 regional banks, those would be owned by private member banks. The very banks these men represented. The board would set policy, but the banks would own the machinery, would collect the interest, would profit from every dollar printed. It was brilliant. It was devious, and it worked. Senator Aldrich took the plan back to Washington, but even he knew it would be hard to pass. Americans were suspicious of banks, suspicious of concentrated power, so they waited. They refined the language. They changed the name from Aldrich Plan to Federal Reserve Act to distance it from the Senator S. Wall Street connections. They emphasized the stability, protection, public benefit, and then they waited for the perfect moment. December 23rd, 1913, most of Congress had left for Christmas. The chambers were nearly empty. And in that vacuum, in that moment when no one was paying attention, the Federal Reserve Act was rushed through both houses and signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson. Just like that, in a matter of hours, the American money supply was privatized, and most of the country didn't even notice. Wilson would later write something chilling, something that suggests he understood what he'd done. He wrote, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men." Those words, think about those words. The president who signed the Federal Reserve into existence admitted he had ruined the country, admitted that power had been concentrated into the hands of a few men. But by then, it was too late. The machinery was in motion. The trap was set. And America ... America walked right into it. So how does it actually work? How does a private institution control the money of an entire nation? The structure is deliberately complex, deliberately confusing, because if people understood it, if they really grasped the mechanics, there would be riots. Here's the simple version. The 12 Federal Reserve banks are private corporations. They have shareholders. Those shareholders are private banks, not the government, not the people, private banks. These shareholders receive dividends, guaranteed 6% annually. No matter what happens to the economy, no matter how many people lose their jobs, no matter how many businesses fail, the shareholders get paid. Always. And who are these shareholders? Well, that's where it gets interesting, because the Federal Reserve refuses to disclose the complete list of member banks. It's private information, but we know the big players: JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, the same institutions, the same names, the descendants of the men on Jekyll Island, still collecting, still profiting, still controlling. But the real power isn't in the dividends. The real power is in the ability to create money. Here's how it works. The United States government needs money, so it issues bonds, treasury bonds. The Federal Reserve buys these bonds. But here's the trick. Here's the part that should make your blood boil. The Federal Reserve creates the money to buy the bonds out of thin air. It doesn't have a vault full of gold. It doesn't have reserves. It simply types numbers into a computer, creates money digitally, lends it to the government, and the government, your government, pays interest on that loan. Interest on money that didn't exist until the Fed decided to create it. Who receives that interest? The Federal Reserve, which distributes it to its private member banks. Do you see it now? Do you understand the machine? The government borrows imaginary money and pays real interest to private banks. Forever, every dollar of national debt, every single dollar of that $34 trillion burden generates interest payments to private institutions. Your tax dollars, your labor, your future, all of it, flowing into private hands through a system designed more than a century ago on a private island by 6 men you've never heard of. If this is making you question everything you were taught about American democracy, if you're starting to see the invisible cage we all live in, then stay with me. Because what comes next will shatter whatever faith you have left in the system. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, because once you see the full picture, you'll never look at money the same way again. But maybe you're thinking, okay, yes, the structure is problematic, but surely the Federal Reserve uses its power responsibly. Surely it protects the economy, prevents crises, serves the public good. Let me show you what actually happened. The Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in American history. Thousands of banks failed. Millions lost their savings. Unemployment reached 25%. People starved. Families were destroyed. And what was the Federal Reserve doing during this time? It was contracting the money supply, making things worse. Why? Because the bankers who controlled it wanted to buy assets cheap, wanted to consolidate power, wanted to eliminate competition. The Fed had the power to prevent the Depression. It chose not to. And when Congress investigated years later, they found evidence of deliberate manipulation. But by then, the damage was done. The small banks were gone, the power was further concentrated, and the American people, they suffered. Fast forward to 2008, the financial crisis. Banks had engaged in reckless lending, created toxic mortgage-backed securities, built a house of cards that was guaranteed to collapse. And when it did, when Lehman Brothers fell and the credit markets froze, who paid the price? Not the bankers, not the institutions that caused the crisis. They got bailouts. They got rescued by who? The Federal Reserve. The same institution owned by the banks being bailed out its own shareholders with public money. The Fed created $16 trillion during the crisis. $16 trillion created out of nothing, lent to banks at near zero interest rates, while ordinary Americans lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost their futures. The banks, they used that cheap Fed money to buy assets at fire sale prices, to consolidate power, to emerge from the crisis bigger and more profitable than ever. And the Federal Reserve, the institution supposedly regulating these banks, helped them do it. Because the Fed doesn't work for you. It works for its shareholders. The private banks, it always has. But surely someone can audit the Fed. Surely Congress exercises oversight. Surely there's accountability. Here's the reality. The Federal Reserve has never been fully audited. Never. It releases selective information, publishes carefully curated reports, but a complete independent audit never happened. Congress has tried. Ron Paul introduced the Federal Reserve Transparency Act multiple times. It went nowhere because the Fed has reserved shareholders. So what do? How do you protect yourself when the entire monetary system is designed to extract your wealth? Some people buy gold, some buy Bitcoin. Some invest in assets that can't be inflated away. And maybe that's wise. Maybe that's survival. But it doesn't fix the underlying problem. It doesn't address the fundamental injustice that a private institution controls the money supply of the world's largest economy, that it operates without real oversight, that it serves private interests while claiming public purpose, that it has more power than any elected official and answers to no one. How is that democracy? How is that freedom? How is that different from feudalism with better branding? The Federal Reserve is more than a bank. It's more than a policy tool. It's a control mechanism, a way to manage an entire population without their knowledge or consent. Because when you control the money supply, you control everything. You control which businesses succeed, which industries grow, which regions prosper. You control the value of labor, the price of shelter, the possibility of retirement. You control ... everything. And we've handed that control to a private cartel. We've allowed it to operate in darkness for more than a century. We've let them convince us this is normal. This is necessary. This is the price of stability. But what stability? For who? The banks that got bailed out in 2008, the wealthy whose assets inflate with every round of quantitative easing. That's not stability for you. That's not protection for your family. That's theft dressed up as policy. And the truly terrifying part, this system has been replicated globally. Central banks around the world follow the Federal Reserve model, private or quasi-private institutions controlling money supply, creating currency out of nothing, generating debt that can never be repaid, ensuring that governments, businesses, families, ... Everyone remains in perpetual servitude to the banking system. Because debt is controlled, debt is power. And when the debt can never be repaid, when it's designed to grow forever, then the control is permanent. You're not a citizen. You're not free. You're a revenue stream, a debtor, a source of interest payments that flow from your labor to their vaults. And this is the world we've accepted, the cage we live in, the system that's slowly crushing the middle class out of existence. But it doesn't have to be this way. And that's what terrifies them. The possibility that people might wake up, might understand, might demand change. Because the Federal Reserve's power is entirely dependent on ignorance, on complexity, on the belief that monetary policy is too sophisticated for ordinary people to understand. But it's not. It's actually quite simple. They create money. They lend it at interest. They inflate away your savings. They bail out their friends. They profit from your labor. It's not complicated. It's not mysterious. It's theft. And once you see it, once you really understand what's happening, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to trusting the system. You can't believe the lies anymore. So here's what you need to ask yourself. What would America look like if the money supply was truly public? If currency was created by the government, interest-free, and spent into circulation for public benefit? No national debt generating endless interest payments. No private banks profiting from money created out of nothing. No boom and bust cycles designed to transfer wealth upward. Just ... A monetary system that serves the people, that funds infrastructure, education, healthcare, that enables prosperity instead of extracting it. Is that even possible? Or has the Federal Reserve's power become so entrenched, so total, that we've forgotten we have a choice? Because we do have a choice. The Federal Reserve was created by an act of Congress. It can be abolished by an act of Congress. Its charter can be revoked. Its power can be but it requires something that seems increasingly rare in modern America. It requires people to care, to understand, to demand accountability from the systems that govern their lives. And maybe that's the real conspiracy. Not that the Federal Reserve exists, not that it's private, but that we've been conditioned to accept it. Conditioned to believe that we can't understand finance, that we need experts, that we should trust institutions, that questioning the monetary system is extremism or ignorance. Because once you accept those premises, once you surrender your right to understand, you've already lost. You've already given up the power to change anything. And they know this. The people who designed this system, the people who profit from it, they know that complexity is their greatest weapon. That if they can make you feel stupid, make you feel overwhelmed, make you believe you can't possibly understand something as sophisticated as monetary policy, then you'll never challenge them. You'll never demand transparency. You'll never threaten their power. But you're not stupid. You understand that if someone creates money out of nothing and lends it to you at interest, they're stealing your future. You understand that a system designed to generate unpayable debt is a system designed for slavery. You understand that when private banks own the machinery that creates public currency, democracy is an illusion. These aren't complicated concepts. They're just hidden, buried under layers of jargon and institutional authority, and they're hidden for a reason. Because the day Americans truly understand the Federal Reserve, the day they truly grasp what was done to them in 1913, is the day the system's legitimacy evaporates. So what happens now? Where do we go from here? Some of you will close this video and try to forget what you've learned. Try to go back to believing the comfortable lies. That's human nature. It's easier to trust the system than to confront how thoroughly you've been deceived. But some of you won't be able to forget. You'll see the Federal Reserve's invisible hand in every economic headline, every inflation report, every crisis. And you'll start asking questions, demanding answers, refusing to accept that a private cartel should control public currency. And that's where change begins. Not with legislation, not with protests, but with consciousness, with understanding spreading person to person, with enough people finally seeing the cage we've been living in. The Federal Reserve's darkest secret isn't that it's private. That information is technically public, buried in legal documents and academic papers. The darkest secret is that they've convinced an entire nation to accept their theft as normal, to see debt slavery as responsible economics, to believe that a system designed by 6 men on a private island to enrich themselves and their descendants is somehow working for the public good. That's the real conspiracy. That's the lie that maintains their power. And the moment that lie collapses, The moment enough people understand what's really happening, the Federal Reserve's century of control ends. The question is, will you be part of that awakening, or will you choose comfortable ignorance? If this has fundamentally changed how you see the world, if you can feel the walls of the cage now, then you need to see what we reveal next. Because the Federal Reserve is just the American chapter of a global story. A network of central banks that spans every continent, coordinates policy, answers to no one, and has more power than any government on earth. They meet in Switzerland, behind closed doors, making decisions that affect billions of lives. And next time, we're taking you inside those meetings. Subscribe now. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And prepare yourself for the truth about who really runs the world. Because once you see the full picture, you'll understand why they work so hard to keep you in the dark.